Welcome back to A Plus Parents, everyone. And with me today, we've got a super duper special guest. Her name is Sarah Reid. And Sarah is with us. She's a homeschool mom. So are you ready for this? She's been a private educator for 19 years, but she's got a bachelor's degree in organizational management, which is, if you ever study business in college, organizational management is a very specific field. And it's actually, I actually have a business degree background, and I remember taking a organizational behavior class, and it was one of my favorite classes in college, but we only got that one. But you have a whole degree in it, which is awesome. And then Sarah has her master's degree in writing, so she helps young people get published. That's right. So if you want to get your young person how to take them through the process of self-publishing, how to be a writer and how to get themselves published. This is the time to stay tuned in and give a listen, because as we get to know Sarah, she's going to share some great tips as well as talk about the program that she has. So, when you get to be around her, and I met her at a convention in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I stopped at her booth right away. And I was like, I stopped at her booth because it was so busy and there was all these people around. And I finally got, where we could spend a couple minutes together. I was like, this is super cool, right? So just really excited to have you here. She's a lifelong learner, educator, author, speaker. She's homeschooled her own kids, and her kids now, one's a college graduate, the other's finishing up their degree in college, which is awesome. She does a program in study skills, but we're going to focus today. We'll come back again and talk another time about study skills, but we're going to talk today about a program that she calls Kids Write Novels. And that's what we want to get into today. So first of all, Sarah, did I leave anything out? Is there anything else that you want people to know about you?
You're amazing. You are meant to do this. You're meant to be a host. Thank you. Got it. Actually, you're fantastic. You do better explaining me than I explain me. So good job.
That's but yeah, I probably do better. It's kind of like, like when you talk to your kids and your kids come back and they come back and tell you, so and so said blah blah blah, and you're like, but I told you that like last week, so I probably don't
Amen.
do myself justice, right? So, well,
Amen.
it's awesome, and I loved having a chance to meet you and talk with you and kind of find out more about what you were doing. That's why I was like, oh my gosh, we got to like share this with everybody. So, when you look at the program that you have, well, first of all, let's just talk about you've got a you start at young ages and you take writers through the entire process, all the way from early elementary ages all the way up through high school. So let's just start with the program and what you all do and what you offer, and then we'll kind of get into some of the specifics.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to know that the way this actually started was with my own son. And he was what I called a writer hater. He just hated writing. And I didn't understand. I'm like, kid, this should be in your DNA to love to write, So, but he did. I tried every way to bribe him, to work with him, to be creative. And so by the time he was 15 years old, it was just a systematic, frustrating experience for both of us. And so I had to come up with something different. At any rate, that's what led to this curriculum that I wrote. And because we were homeschooling at the time through a charter school, it had to meet the rigor of the standards for graduation. And so, because I just love education so much, I loved homeschooling my kids, that I sat down and I wrote this curriculum thinking like, okay, I've got to get my kid to like to write, because the fact of the matter is everybody loves story in some format. Everybody loves story, and it doesn't have to be book, it can be movies, and we're a huge movie family. Like every Wednesday night movie night, and I knew my son loved stories and he loved movies, so I knew I had something to work with. In fact, when people come to our table at conferences and want to talk, at least a third of the students do not like to write, so at least a third that enter our program don't like to write. And I'll tell you what, they all end up getting published, which we can talk about later. But yeah, so the program started with high school. So 9th through 12th grade, I wrote this book, and kind of last minute, I threw it out there to our big homeschool education group. We had probably about 150 to 200 students in this big group in California. And I had 8 students sign up, and my son was one of my first victims. I tested this out, and I will tell you what, it was amazing. These kids were so dedicated. Even my son, and I always say this, like in the whole school year, I was his teacher and his mother, his official teacher. And I think one time I had to say, hey, dude, you got to go write your chapter. Come on. And he's like, okay. And that was it. So It was such a different experience for me, and then to have 7 other, of my kids, my students write and publish. So I continued on with it for a few years and began to have parents who had their student go through my program in California, like, "I have a middle grader who wants to write," or, "I have a 5th grader who really wants to write. They wanna do this." So that's how this whole thing started. Now we just recently, in fact, we're still in production, rolling it out this summer, our 2nd and 3rd grade, and we are just introducing them. My desire is that if we can establish a love of story at an early age, the writing is actually the easy part. I think sometimes people put the writing first and the story second, we tap into the love of story, and that makes the writing so much easier. And when we start them very young, they're not publishing novels in 2nd grade, but they are actually publishing a children's picture book. It is very important. Kind of the bedrock of our curriculum line is that there is something tangible at the end of the year that is a reflection of all of your hard work. That is important. That is so critical to what we do. And we say self publishing, a lot of students really are just using it as a printer. So they're using Amazon's KDP as a print house for them. And they do sell it to friends and family. And some just, they've written amazing books and they market it and they sell. I think I had one student, we just went into full publishing. We're just about finished with this year's class. And I had one student say that they already had sold like 27 copies of their book. And I'm thinking, you just beat out some traditionally published authors, good job. But I think that the kids' excitement for this is really what takes it beyond the class at that point.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned KDP publishing through Amazon, and that's what we used when I published my first book. And it was like, and I had to get somebody to help me do it because I had no idea what to do, and oh my gosh, how many times we had to resubmit it because they didn't like the binding on it, and
Oh
it was
yeah.
all this crazy stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
So well, that's wild. All right, well, when like what student does your program, right? What would you say like the direct impact on a student's life by they're going through your program, like what do they walk away with? And it's really great because when you talk about your son and he was like, you say a writer hater, right?
Right.
I think that's really funny. But when kids come away with what they get out of your course, like what would you say, like, I think you kind of touched on it, but how would you say like that direct impact, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, that's such an excellent question. There's so many aspects, like I said, is I call this curriculum the great equalizer, because you have kids at so many different levels of writing and so many, even their thought process. And so to answer that question, let me just say this. When I was writing it, I had to align it to all of these standards: reading comprehension, cause and effect. There was just so many things that I aligned it to. And so what that does, there's multiple answers, but one of the big ones is the academic self-confidence that a student gains from having written and published a novel that I know I've heard this from a lot of adults, especially parents who are like, I've been wanting to write a novel and I haven't even done it. And my kid just published a novel. So the confidence that it builds in a student, and I know those listening can't see this, but I am holding up my son's novel, and he wrote a novel called Drafted, and his story is called Drafted, and it was amazing, a kind of futuristic sci-fi story about a teenager in a time where they were drafting teenagers into the military. So it's almost reminiscent of our history, of war. But this kid was a pacifist, and he had to survive this brutal training camp. I didn't even know my kid knew what a pacifist was at that point in time. So I want to say the second thing is this self-discovery. Students, they discover what they believe about the world and what they believe about their place in it. And so I always tell parents that we actually, in this curriculum, inadvertently kind of delve into psychology. Like, what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean for good people? Can good people do really bad things? Does that make them bad? And what does redemption look like? So I'd say, first and foremost, academic confidence. Second, there is a self-discovery that comes out of this process where students really learn a lot about themselves and a lot about what they really believe. Because I think as parents, we're always my son calls it lecturing. Okay, fine. I was like, Mom, not another lecture. But we're always trying to teach them about life, about being an adult, about being productive, about being a citizen, of the world, as they say. And so with this, all of the things that we've taught them, they're now questioning those as far as, I believe this. I believe it's important to be kind to people. But what does that actually look like? What does it look like when you are angry or someone betrayed you? What does kindness look at that point in time? So there's this journey of self-discovery through the writing. Now, ultimately, and I could go on and on for the sake of brevity, I'll just give you one or two more. This is an excellent resume builder. The fact that they have, here's the link to my published novel. I mean, I'm 13. How cool is that? So recently we were at a conference in Tennessee, and I had several of my students who are just publishing show up and volunteer. And I was giving a workshop about the power of story, along with a couple of novelists, famous novelists within the homeschool. Chuck Black and Brian Davis and I were presenting this. And I had my students that were in the workshop stand up. And the youngest one was 13, and she had a novel published on Amazon, and she had already sold copies. And just the level that people were impressed with her, and the joy and the pride that was on her face that she had accomplished something. And finally, and probably the least important to kids, but definitely was important to me, is this is a full English language arts course. So they are actually getting the full course of standards that they need to meet without any supplementation. But what I found out, and I joke that I'm not this smart to have known this ahead of time. What I have found through doing this with the high school for many, many years is that students become stronger writers even in the nonfiction arena, because they're able to take in the standards. Like, we don't ever use the word vocabulary. We don't ever use the word quote unquote grammar per se, cause and effect. We don't use those terms as much as we talk about story, and we talk about what happens when somebody makes that decision. What are the consequences of that? And they're getting the cause and effect. So what ends up happening is they're able to execute the English language arts standards better than if you just gave them a bunch of worksheets, had them read maybe some Shakespeare, which I love and is valuable. However, we have found that they assimilate and execute the standards of English language arts at a much higher level than I'd say the average student, which I call it the happy accident. Maybe I should start claiming I'm just that smart, and I meant it to be that way.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic, and the list goes on, but I'll cut it there.
Yeah, well, no, that's amazing. Well, okay, so now, you have a background in business, right? And one of the things, most people in business, they're, everybody's like data, data. Where's the data? They're like, how do you measure this, right? So everything you just said, I know moms, listeners, or young people, dads, grandma and grandpa, whoever's listening right now, they're like, I want this for my young person, and I want them to be able to come out. And you're right. Like, at the time when you can put on your resume, well, I published a book when I was 13, or, and all these different things that you have. So when you look at it from the business side, right, and measuring data, how do you actually measure those benefits that kids are going to get out of doing the program?
Yeah, it is actually something that you have to be so intentional about long term. Because anybody who knows, when talking about data and just that return on that investment, let's say that we're making in the kids and writing a novel, it's a long term thing that you have to. So the way it started, the way I actually found out about this was my son, as I mentioned, my writer hater. He went on to finish high school and graduate and go to college. He is a student at Liberty University. So my son's had to do all of the general education that everybody, of course, loves to do. And so he's written many, many, many papers, many essays. And I am ashamed to admit sometimes he waits till the day before to write his papers. And his
No
mom
one
is
else does that. That's right, right?
I, I'm like, you are 21 years old. Okay, come on. You're not an adult. So I've seen seen the results of those papers, and I know the kind of person he was, the kind of writer he was before this class. And I have to tell you, I am so impressed. I know he's my son, but I tend to be a little harder on my own children than I am on others. I have a background also in coaching. I was a volleyball player in college. I was a high school coach. That coaching, mentality kind of comes out in me often. And he showed me several of his papers, and I was really, he gets A's on pretty much every paper. And I was amazed to see some of the notes, kind of the margin notes from his professors. And they said things such as, excellent clarity, well organized. And that's a big problem I see having taught English and worked with students, is their organization of their thoughts sometimes is a mishmash. And so getting even adults to write a well organized paper can be a challenge. I used to, in my college, in my undergrad, doing my general ed, I was invited to help pilot a program for a writing center at my college. And so I was one of 4 students chosen to basically be there to help other students kind of clean up their essays and help them. And it's amazing. Unfortunately, it's writing a good paper is becoming a lost art. How about I'll say it that way? It's becoming a
Yeah.
lost art. Now, so I've seen it definitely with my son, and we are now setting up plans to track the writing. It's a little difficult because writing can be subjective, but the proof is there for sure. And kids don't always know that coming in, that they're going to be a better essay writer. But it's something that has, I felt, been probably one of the more important things that we can offer through this program, is a future as an excellent written communicator. So like I said, another happy accident. Loved it.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. It's like how many times how many emails do we go through a day and we're reading things, and how many times do I have to send something back? Even to my own staff, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about here, right? And they're funny because they know what they're talking about, but I don't, right? And it's like, but it is in how things get communicated. So, and how many times that we're out somewhere and we're talking to parents and we're asking them, "So what's important to you?" Like, organization and how they manage things and how they communicate. It's like, okay, so this is teaching them those skills, and those skills are going to take them, whether they're writing a book or they're writing courses, but just in communicating, and to be able to do it in a written communication, that they're clear and they're able to do it in a concise way that the person reading the communication actually gets it. That's huge, right? So
Well, and
uh
you mentioned something that, if you don't mind me touching back on, you mentioned
not
something
all.
and you really hit it on the head there. You talked about not knowing that person knows what they meant to say, but you don't know what they're saying. And I will tell you, when you are in an English class and you write an essay, outside of maybe your parent proofreading it, your instructor, your teacher is probably the only one that's going to read that essay. You get so little feedback. However, when you're writing fiction, you're getting a lot of feedback from different people. And that is something that I really talk to students about, the importance of beta readers, the importance of critique partners, because what you meant to communicate is not always what is being received. And
Mm.
so in our course, they actually go through quite a big revision process. You're talking revising an entire book minimum of 2 times, but they're also getting feedback from multiple other peers and reviewers. And so what they're beginning to understand is, okay, what I'm saying isn't necessarily what's being received. The importance even in fiction is, how is this being widely received?
Mm.
So that is something that helps them in the future. And as you were saying, when you're just talking to people, when they begin at their age to understand that what I am saying or what I think isn't always what I'm communicating. And in this class, they get a very extensive review process in which they do begin to make those changes in communicating things. And the lastly, like research. We talk about research, that they need to research, and they are researching on their own. We don't ever have to mention it again because they want a really authentic story. They want this suspension. If a reader is going to believe that dragons are really flying through the air, breathing fire, if they're going to suspend disbelief, which is an actual mental condition, is suspending disbelief. It's a science that people do that. Then they need to make it very realistic. So they're doing research, and so that's another thing that I've seen with not only my son but some other students is they're excellent researchers.
Hmm.
They were just motivated to do it. So it's been really interesting to see how this has been unfolding over the years.
Wow. That's really awesome. Okay, so here, we hear the kids they're getting what they're getting, right? And you can tell that they're getting true results, right? What do you hear from moms or dads? What do you hear from parents when after kids have finished your course? What kind of feedback are you hearing back from moms and dads? Kids are going to do it. They're going to do the course, and it's like, when you ask your kids at dinner and you're like, okay, what'd you do today? Nothing. Well, what'd you learn in school today? Nothing. It's kind of like that's their pat answer, right? But
Yeah.
but parents will communicate with you, right? So what kind of feedback are you getting from parents about once they see their kids and when their young people have gone through the programs?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. I'm so glad you asked that. You're dealing with a lot of different kids and a lot of different personalities. And so I don't always know what they think about what's going on. I have class students in my classes that never say a word. And I am telling you, an entire school year, they never talk. They don't want to. No one forces them to talk. They never miss a class and they never talk. Here's what's interesting. Now that we've been doing this circuit of homeschool conferences multiple years, again, I'll use the example. Just recently, I had a couple of parents come up to my table at the conference who have existing students, and we are now at the last few weeks of class. So they've already finished their novels and revised a couple times. And I have this one student, and he never says anything. And I get this email from him at the very end where he said, Mrs. the most I've ever heard him talk, Mrs. Reid, thank you so much for doing this for us. The publishing, self-publishing, as you mentioned, is very hard. Thank you so much for doing this for us. I loved your class. You're my favorite teacher. And I just thought, like, I don't get that feedback typically. And I just thought, wow. But his mom came up to me and she, at the conference, she says, I am so and so's mom. And I was like, oh, wonderful. This kid that has never spoken until the email I'd gotten. And she says, you know what? As a parent, I can't thank you enough. She's like, I've never seen my son ever respond to a class this way. She's like,
Mhm.
he always wanted to be there. I never had to like get him to do his homework. He was just so engaged in your class. And then I've had other parents who send me emails. And in fact, I just had an email back and forth with a parent over the last 48 hours and said, my daughter is being recognized at a youth group for her book. Like they're calling her up in front of the whole youth group to talk about accomplishments.
Wow.
And then I overheard her reading her book to a small group of people at a separate thing. So, and then lastly, I think probably, the proof is in the data, the proof is in the statistics. I have had so many repeat students. I have probably about 25% of my students take the class a second year. And the
Mm.
content doesn't necessarily change that we're teaching, although now I'm able to be, a little more, as I say, tough on their writing. I'm able to push them further because they've already been through the basics. But they're paying and taking the exact same class again.
Mm.
So I did because of the requests of so many parents, I am actually even adding a new class that we're not going to necessarily be advertising because it's for existing students primarily. We're doing advanced writing. So this is where instead of focusing on writing a novel, we're focusing on the craft of writing. So we are
Mm.
taking these students and we're pushing their writing ability all the way up to the next level. So
Wow.
that just speaks to how they love it. And again, I could go on and on about the emails from parents, but I will
Yeah.
also finally say, as a parent whose son wrote a novel, I have a little box of the keepsakes that I have of my kids, the little onesie, the little award that they got. But the book that my son wrote it is his heart and his soul captured in the pages of this book. There's nothing like it, and it is my most prized, most treasured thing that I have saved from my son. So
Oh,
that alone is I have
yeah.
the coolest in the world. Second to you, Mr. D, I
You
have the
all,
coolest
hey,
in
there we
the
go. Well, something funny when you just said that. So, I think the book I wrote came out, I want to say 2 years ago, right? And who put it in the treasure box was my mom, right? Even after all these years, and she's
Yes,
over 80 years old, right? So there we go. So
I love that. She's still your mom. She's still
she's
proud
still
of
my mom,
you.
man. She's still
Absolutely,
proud of her boy.
absolutely.
That's right.
I always tell the dads too, but like when kids order their author copies, so they can order at print cost copies.
Right,
And
right.
so when they get a box of their copies and they know what the book looks like, they design their own covers. We help them, but they design their own covers. They know everything. But when they open that box and all those glossy covers with their name on it, tears, tears. Even if
Yeah,
it's just a man tear, there are tears of joy.
right.
And I try to tell them, don't open the box until the whole family's together. Open it together because it's so exciting.
Oh, that's awesome. That is so awesome. All right, Sarah. So how do people reach you? How are they going to find you online? And because I know people are like, okay, get
Yeah.
to it. Like we have we'll have the links in the show notes, but how do people reach you online?
Yeah, and I am very accessible. I prefer to answer a lot of the emails myself. I do get quite inundated with emails, but I love those initial contacts. So we have two websites. The parent company is Innovative Learning Press, where we have multiple curriculum. And then we have the trade name Kids Write Novels that you did mention earlier. So they can go to
Mhm.
kidswritenovels.com. And
Okay.
if they fill out that contact form, that comes to me. That's important to me that they just reach the top and that they are hearing from me directly. And we have some information to send them. We're actually getting so inundated with messages through our contact form that I think today I'm going to even be recording a video of some of the stuff that we talked about, just an overview video for parents, because I can't, I'd be on the phone all day long explaining things to parents. So
Right.
that's good news. That's a
That
huge
is great
blessing.
news.
Yeah,
That's
a
awesome.
lot of kids are going to realize their dream of finishing and self-publishing a novel because so many people, kids, adults, doesn't matter, they start a novel and then they quit. And it's always around the same
Right.
spot, that messy middle, and they stop.
Yeah.
And so we are able to provide that support system for them to finish it. So yes, please reach out, please email.
That's really cool.
Our
There's
phone
probably some moms and dads that are like, dude, I'm taking your class too,
Yeah,
man. I
yeah,
want to
yeah.
do it.
Parents have been
Right?
asking. Yeah, parents have been asking. So it's in the back of my brain. In a couple of years, I might roll out
That's awesome.
a parent version.
Well, very good. Okay, so it's kidswritenovels.com and then
Yeah.
it's innovativepress.org.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. So, and we'll have both of those sites up in the show notes. You'll be able to access all that. Sarah, we got to come back and do this again. This was just
I
too
love
fun.
it. I
Okay.
love
So
it.
yeah.
You are
So
fantastic. I love it.
no, thanks. This has been great. It's been great to find out more about what you're up to and what you're doing and how you're making a difference in the lives of young people. So it's just huge. All right, very good. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to A Plus Parents. And Sarah, thank you for making your day work to be here because I know you got a lot going on as well. And guys, guess what? We'll talk to you next time. See you next time, everybody. Bye.